by focusing on education and development, on communications, and on rewards and recognition. Education and training can be powerful tools. Some of this education can deal directly with benchmarking, best practices exchange, and the use of databases that facilitate information sharing. In addition, we can encourage vicarious learning by bringing into our organization outside speakers, ideas, tools, and practices. In terms of communications, some of the best organizations in the world have come up with innovative, yet easily adaptable approaches. Companies as diverse as Xerox and Federal Express, Toyota and Milliken, make idea exchange and competitor assessment a regular part of their meetings. In addition, they lay out work areas to encourage employee interactions and information transfer. They also design libraries and bulletin boards to spotlight other companies and industrial innovations and procedures. Finally, in terms of reward and recognition, with benchmarking and business improvements, we get what we pay for. Reward systems are instrumental in encouraging innovative adaptation. Some companies are just beginning to use these methods, relying for reinforcements on attaboys, pats on the back. Other companies are experimenting with more formal systems, including gain sharing and other rewards, to encourage vicarious learning and creative borrowing. Finally, there are companies at the vanguard of innovation. They are embedding benchmarking and creative adaptation in performance reviews, where they become key factors influencing promotion, incentive pay, and employee development. Overall, benchmarking is not a miracle cure for every ailment our organizations may face, but its presence in our companies provides us with a crucial reminder that we can learn from others. Benchmarking discourages inwardness and complacency. It turns our view outward, forces us to consider the practices of the best and the brightest companies, and in so doing, it points the way to the continuous improvement our businesses need as we approach the dawn of a new millennium. Let me leave you with a final thought about both the new economy and the importance of benchmarking in the new global economy. It comes from the late Eric Hoffer, who wrote, "In time of drastic change, it is the learners who inherit the future. The learned find themselves equipped to live in a world that no longer exists. Those organizations that do not join with their peers in sharing of performance data will find that they are living in a world that no longer exists."
Let us thank you very much, Mr. Finnigan. Thank you very much for your important concepts shared with us today. Let us begin the second question and answer session. The first question is coming from Atoyac, Mexico, the Federal Commission of Electricity. Good afternoon. When we have clients who are very difficult and who punish us with their not paying on time, we have sometimes equipment that is not new. And what about these clients, for instance, like government? They are very good because they, in the volume, they represent a lot of money. What can we use the benchmarking where service quality is not the point of reference, but the signing of contracts?
If I understood the question, it is how would you benchmark service quality when the process subject really is the signing of a contract? I'm not familiar with that particular process, but if I were to just simply take it as part of a sales cycle, a part of a sales process, and that what you're really talking about now is the closure, the actual signing of the contract, that kind of a process could be benchmarked because exchanges between organizations invariably involve the negotiation of a contractual agreement, of what will be delivered to the customer and when, and the responsibility of the customer back to the supplier in terms of payment, in terms of support, etc. And there's a whole variety of organizations one can look at that kind of service support and benchmark, whether in your own industry and without. I guess the best answer I can tell you is I have yet to encounter a subject that in fact could not be benchmarked, or a process that could not be subjected to some process improvement. And again, I would suggest that external sources are probably far better than internal sources in attempting to ultimately improve a work process of any kind.
La siguiente pregunta proviene de Colima.
The second question is coming from Colima Technological Institute. Our question is, in a very small enterprise that has very few employees and very small economic potential, how can you implement benchmarking with limited resources?
It may be difficult to do that in a very small organization and where resources are very limited. However, let me remind you of two things. First of all, benchmarking can be done as a simple librarian's research, that is, going into the public domain. I'm not sure what business you're talking about, but coming back to the subject we just had in the previous question, the process of contract negotiation. There's a lot of literature on that subject. There are, I'm sure, a lot of cases representing organizations on that subject. And a librarian, either within an organization or even a public librarian, perhaps could get into a variety of databases and provide literature to read, which is absolutely a form of benchmarking on that subject. But the other process is that you seek out other organizations like yourselves, perhaps through professional association, and you form a collaborative for the performance of benchmarking. Again, if you're as small an organization as you describe, and you also, I think, said that maybe the future looked a little lean, one, I would say it behooves you to find a way of identifying ways you can improve what you do and improve the opportunities for your business. And I think benchmarking or external data search can be helpful, and I'm sure you may find other small organizations do the same thing.
La siguiente pregunta nos viene de
Next question is coming from Paraguay, from the Catholic University, Paraguay.
Como una respuesta a la globalización de la economía,
As-
el surgimiento de
How
tratados
can, as a response to the globalization of the economy, we have the different treaties, regional treaties, like Mercosur, for instance, but then that implies also more and more competition. In this situation, what is more convenient? To have an integrated improvement,
de instituciones del sector público,
or to improve this government sector,
logro de resultados,
and we are risking being simply
unilateral,
innovative but improvised rather, or do we have to risk just going into changes without an institutional approach? What would you do to encourage an entrepreneur to start this change, this process of change, both on an individual level and on an enterprise level?
Very excellent question. I have to comment on the questions today. Have been very challenging and very outstanding, and obviously you've all been paying very, very close attention. Let me say this. I think I made a comment earlier, and I referenced John Naisbitt's book on global paradox, and let me borrow something from him. Naisbitt makes an important point, and the point is that what is happening in the world today is really a revolution. My writing partner describes it as an economic revolution of which mankind has only experienced twice before, when we went from the Iron Age to the Agrarian Age, and then from the Agrarian to the Industrial. And now it's happening again, and we're moving from the Industrial to a knowledge economy, an information-based economy. And we don't know what the outcome is going to be. And we don't know what the effects on everything are going to be. But there are some things that are quite apparent. And the first one is that technology is driving it, and technology is changing very rapidly. Secondly, that technology and the material to produce resources, to produce products and services, are not geographically constrained any longer. So the technology and resources are finding themselves coalescing in places like Vietnam, Mexico, who over the last several years has had one of the highest capital investment programs in the world, in Indonesia, who has the fastest growing economy in the world, the last time I looked. And it's happening in China, and it's happening obviously in Japan, but it's also happening through all of the Americas. What that really says is that today's competitors may not be tomorrow's competitors. That to really understand what's happening in your industry, you must have an ear out there, which is why I think Lester Thurow described the economy as competitive cooperative. Yes, you must be competitive, but if you're going to stay competitive, you're going to have to be cooperative, and cooperative with some of your existing competitors. I'm sure many of you noticed that within the last few weeks, IBM and Apple and Motorola have announced that they're coming together in a cooperation in order to be competitive with Microsoft and with Intel. The world is changing very rapidly, and I think if you were referencing in comments about governments, referencing all of the trade agreements and discussions, I get a little flippant, I suppose. Those are all very important. I think they would happen anyway. I think it is happening anyway. And sometimes maybe our governments are lagging behind the realities of what's happening in industry and happening in business and happening in the economy. If you wish to survive, I believe you're going to have to become competitive cooperative.
La siguiente pregunta proviene de Acapulco.
Next question comes from Acapulco, from Mexico, the Technological Institute in Acapulco.
Buenos días.
Good morning. The question, I wrote it when we were listening to the first module. I am the general manager of an enterprise, a motor enterprise. My question is, how can I correlate the processes, the total quality management and reengineering with the processes of benchmarking how can I combine them into one? In other words, in order not to have three different concepts or three different graphs or flowcharts of all these processes, how can I combine them to have only one comprehensive one? And my second question would be, how can I have a graph or some sort of model to follow up these systems?
Very, very good question. Let me try and take it in three parts. First of all, the relationship of benchmarking to total quality. In my mind, the pursuit of continuous improvement, and the satisfaction of customer requirements, which is the basis and the purpose of total quality management, has three elements to it. First of it all, it has the process or the quality improvement elements, that is, the kinds of tools, the kinds of methodology that an organization uses in order to improve all of its processes. The second is, for lack of a better term, employee involvement. The current word would be empowerment. That is, engaging the employees in embracing that effort and seeing the value in pursuing process and work process improvement. Where benchmarking enters into it is as an equal partner to the other two, as the basis of telling you what the priorities ought to be, What should we work on first? What is going to be the process improvement or the continuous improvement effort that is going to give us the most competitive edge? I'm not a re-engineering expert, and there are probably other people who might answer this question a little bit differently, but let me say this about re-engineering. I don't know that re-engineering and total quality are parallel partners. In my mind, re-engineering is a logical extension of total quality efforts. I think organizations that wish to pursue re-engineering in terms of completely rebuilding their work processes are going to have established a clear understanding of the major processes of their organization first. And that very often, I think, requires the sort of collaborative, detailed, continuous improvement efforts that are inherent in total quality management. So in my mind, one masters the processes of total quality and then logically moves towards the advantages of re-engineering. For one thing, if you're successful with total quality, I think one of the things that you'll discover is that as the work processes have improved, that the need for your manpower in those areas tends to weaken, and that therefore re-engineering becomes a logical way of taking advantage of that. Now, a model, I don't have a model other than the one that I shared with you in the last presentation on continuous improvement. I mentioned Bogan's and English's book on benchmarking best practices, contains a number of excellent models on re-engineering and total quality management. I'm sure there are more than enough in the literature, but I don't have one readily available that I could share with you.
And now the question comes from La Paz, Baja California, South Baja California, from the university. If you could please explain to us or elaborate a little bit more about the application of concepts and methods of benchmarking to educational services and administration of universities.
Sure, I'll try. As I said a moment ago, I think you can benchmark almost anything. I think the first thing that a university would need to do is to identify what its major work processes are. One that readily comes to my mind would be student registration. Always a difficult thing for the administration and not always a popular thing with the students. Just a very simple communication to a number of universities. I'm certain administrators in your schools have a sense of who you think does that very well. Or perhaps you could through your own professional administrative association, get a group of partners who would be willing to exchange information on how they go about student registration or any other process within the university. Again, I think, as I mentioned, professional associations, I think you have a ready-made contact. The issue is really getting a discussion on a table that you can talk about with your peers. I hope that was addressed your question.
We have only a couple of more minutes for the next question that is coming from Yafit Medellin, Colombia. This is from the university. And I would like to ask you, from your experience, what you think would happen if a benchmarking process fails? How would that impact the initiation of the starting up of another process of benchmarking in the same enterprise?
That's a very, very good question, because that, in fact, is most likely going to happen. It certainly did with us. If you accept what I said a little while ago about learning, and one of the key elements of learning is learning both from our successes and also from our failures. We no longer can afford to punish people for failing. We need to simply learn from that failure and get on with it. And that would be my same comment. If you run into a problem with a benchmarking project, learn why it didn't work and repeat the effort and don't make the same mistake twice.
De nuevo reiteramos las gracias, señor Finnigan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Finnigan, for all these concepts that you have given us and for everybody's participation. We hope that you have enjoyed this video conference, and we will continue transmitting programs on the latest in management techniques and systems and global competitiveness. Beginning with the first video conference in the 1995 series, Management Systems for the 21st Century, Re-engineering and Total Quality Management Beyond the Basics, which is scheduled for January 26. It will be followed by 6 other programs which are outlined in your viewer support packages. Next year, we will continue with our telecommunications for education and professional development series, beginning with the video conference Distance Education, Alternative Models and Implementation, which will be transmitted on February 16, and the video conference on Multimedia Training Strategies, Design and Evaluation, which is scheduled for April 20. A certificate is also available to participants in this series. We're also proud to announce the beginning of our latest series entitled Strategic Resource Management, which will begin transmission on February 28 with the program International Joint Ventures and Technology as a Strategic Resource, Current Free Trade Opportunities, Investment and Globalization. We ask that you consult your participant manuals, where you will find further information on the other video conferences of this fascinating series. Lastly, we ask that our site coordinators send us any remaining required documents for candidates to the Certificate of the Management Systems for the 21st Century series, which concludes its 1994 offerings today. On behalf of all of us who collaborate with the International Training Center, I thank you for your participation and interest in today's program. Thank you very much, and see you soon.